Hi, I'm Jenny White with Reclaim Oklahoma Parent Empowerment, and I'm the Education Director, and this is
Deana Haines, and I am the private school director.
awesome. So, Deana, I wanted to ask you a question today. What do you think? There's been a lot of discussion about school choice and vouchers and that kind of thing. I think just for the record, I'm going to say that school choice is a kind of a hard thing to understand because there's some terminology that goes around it. So school choice would be the ability for you to send your child to any place, public school, private school, homeschool, just whatever works for your child, but you do that on your own dime. That's your choice. Well, a voucher system is where you take public money, and by public money, I mean that the government has no money unless it takes it from us, right? So they take our money from us and they put it into the coffers. And yes, some goes to transportation, some goes to education. But the point is that once they take it from us, it's not our money anymore. It's now the government. So when the government wants to give us money back, there have to be some kind of strings that go along with it. For example, you wouldn't want, lots of people complain about waste in the government. Well, we don't want that to happen. We want our taxpayer funds to be accounted for so there isn't waste, fraud, and corruption. So any time that public funds are given to a private individual or any other place, there is an accountability system that's required at that point to determine how those dollars are being spent. Now, in a tax credit situation where if we keep our money before the government takes it from us, then it is our money. It's never left our hands, and if we're allowed to keep our tax dollars to use to educate our kids, then the government isn't involved. So let's just make sure that we get those definitions out there right away. ROPE is not for a voucher system, but we are for a tax credit system to be able to help parents who might not otherwise be able to make other educational choices for their children. So when we talk, Deana, about public money going into a private school, what are your concerns?
Well, my concerns are when public funds go into private institutions that are no longer private. You can look at it as, government is not the answer. Private enterprises or private schools are working, and they're working independently from the government. So when you take state money or voucher money, which is state money, then you have public funds into these private sectors, private enterprises, and then essentially you have no private education. It all becomes public education.
So how does the government affect, because we've heard a lot of this, well, it's your choice to get into this system or not. The school doesn't necessarily have to choose to take public money. So if it's voluntary, what are the issues with that then?
So they're playing it as it's voluntary, but what happens is if you attend a private institution and one child takes that money, every student within that school now has to abide by whatever government regulations come with the state money, whether it's one child or 10 children.
And what would be an example of some regulations that might come with state money?
Some regulations that might come with state money, they may be able to come in and tell the schools they have to hire specific teachers. They may be able to come into schools and tell them that kind of curriculum they can or can't teach. And then it also comes along with the anti-discrimination laws. And that opens a whole other door that throws in a lot of muddy water into the private education.
So basically what I hear you saying is that once public money gets into private institutions, they're no longer private.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So right now you have like a public product, a private, and two different kinds of private products. And so really it kind of is a free market in the sense of competition that people keep liking to talk about. But what happens is when you force, which vouchers would do, when you force public money into private enterprises goes out the window and it all becomes public.
And isn't it true that as Republicans or conservatives, we believe that the state doesn't provide competition, private enterprise provides competition?
Right, that is true.
So, question, when schools were closed down from COVID, lots and lots and lots of private schools were inundated with people who wanted to get their kids out of public schools, and there were wait lists. There were a lot of parents that were doing all kinds of interesting things while they were trying to wait to get into a private school. Do you remember any of those?
Yeah, I mean, there are small learning pods. People were opening their homes for, I guess, essentially you could call it homeschool, but basically they were private schooling their group of students. There were churches that were opening their doors to allow for their kids to come study there, any kid.
The private communities were coming up with ideas out of the box that were not being financed by public money.
Right.
So they were incentivized by public money.
Right.
So anything else on the topic?
And mostly just that we are for school choice. In fact, we utilize school choice in my family, and the state of Oklahoma is one of the states in the country that has freedom of school choice in many ways that other states don't. But on this topic, you have to be really careful when you're putting public money into private enterprises. Because then at that point, when that public choice or when the private choice is gone, there's going to be nowhere else to go. Okay, Jenni, so let me ask you the same thing. What is your stance as a homeschool parent on having public money fund homeschooling?
Well, it's almost a little different. I mean, we're kind of the same thing. Again, once public money comes into homeschool, then it changes it from the private homeschool into something different. It's almost like a hybrid. And my argument kind of has been that, especially with homeschooling, we have EPIC in Oklahoma, and with EPIC, you have the opportunity to enroll your child and get state funds to be able to educate your kid at home with those state funds using EPIC curriculum. So really, if you can homeschool by using EPIC, then what is the reason for giving state funds to somebody like me who homeschools on my own dime? I mean, that's kind of a concern, and it does make me wonder, if EPIC, if public schools getting public money aren't satisfactory, then why do we want to put that same public money into something that's working right now, which all indications homeschooling is.
So what would you say about those families who want to homeschool, but they don't want to use EPIC because it is a public virtual school? What would you tell those people who are looking at this saying, well, but if I just had that money come back to me, I would be able to homeschool?
Well, homeschoolers are really wily people, and a lot of us do a lot on a very little bit of money. And so that makes us very open to different kinds of solutions. For example, we met a single mother in our church, and her daughter was the same as my third oldest daughter. I've got to remember with that many kids. And so we just said, hey, why don't you let us homeschool your daughter along with us? And so she did. She homeschooled with us from 6th grade and kind of became a member of the family. And, we were all good with that. And it's interesting that I mentioned that same story to a legislator the other day, and he said, can you do that? Absolutely, I can. Homeschool is constitutional here in Oklahoma, and I can do it any way I see fit. But what happens if public money comes in and then that changes the fact, and they say, well, you can't homeschool somebody else's child or something like that. So there are a lot of different ways that homeschoolers homeschool, and we just don't want to have the government come in and say, oh, you can't do it that way, though. Oh, and I'll bring up another point, too, because a lot of people say, well, this is voluntary, homeschoolers don't have to take it. Well, some people will remember that we fought against Common Core from 2010 to 2014, and we were very much against that because it was a government overreach from the federal level into state education. And we would have, I was interviewed by Glenn Beck a couple of times, and, well, why do you care? You're a homeschooler. What difference does it make? And my argument at the time was because of private enterprise, what happens is when the state actually moves to a different system like they would have in Common Core, and so many states were doing that, then what would end up happening is textbooks would change to be able to meet the demand for the market. And then homeschoolers who didn't want to use Common Core would be out in terms of the homeschool market. That's exactly what happened. We were right on the money. Government gets involved. Now homeschoolers really have to work to find textbooks, especially in math. For example, especially in math, where Common Core just kind of took over, that prevents the use of Common Core. So there is a definite disadvantage. Whether they say it's voluntary or not, it doesn't matter, because circumstances around that situation will change and then put us in different circumstances.
Right, and which kind of touches in on what I said. If one private schooler voluntarily takes the money, it touches every student within that school.
Exactly.
And
And then how does the government tell? Well, you're a private homeschooler, but you're a homeschooler that gets a voucher. It just muddies the water completely.
So, okay, well, what else do you have to say about these vouchers and public money coming into private education, whether it be in a private school or a homeschool?
Well, I think all of us want choice. We want choice. That's why there are people moving to Oklahoma, because we're so open to choice. And that's great. We're all for that. But you can't expect the government to create competition. Look at healthcare. Look what happened there. We just had to, pass the bill, read it after we passed it, and now very few private healthcare choices are available. So once the government sets foot into the private sphere, it's no longer private.
That's exactly right. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.